thank you so much for joining me at Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center. We want to say that several times. We're recording this live. There's a lot to talk about. We'll get some good news. We'll get to some not so good news. We'll talk about disinformation and the elections, and a little bit about you, too. So I'd love you. I think we'll have to ask first about the Apple partnership. We're going to talk a little bit about today. It was a partnership with OpenAI at the Worldwide Developers Conference. And now Apple computers, phones, and iPads are going to have ChatGPT built into them sometime this year. Obviously, this is a huge deal. It's the first one Apple's done. They've been talking to a number of people. They may include other people over time. Talk about how this partnership works from your perspective. I had a little chat with Tim Cook earlier today about his perspective, and I'd like to get how you look at this deal.
It's a great milestone for us. You know, Apple is an iconic consumer product company, and our goal is to reach as many people out there as possible with great uses of AI. And this is a great opportunity to bring ChatGPT to all users of Apple on all of the devices without having to switch. And you know, we'll be working with them very closely over the next few months to figure out exactly what it's going to look like on the product side, and we'll have more to share soon.
Sorry, thank you. So I'd like you more specifics, though, if you don't mind. What are you doing precisely? Because Tim had talked about this idea of answers, and you go to ChatGPT, they'll have their own answers. They obviously need to improve Siri because it's so terrible. It's the worst. But what is, from your perspective, you remind me a little bit of when Netscape got in different places, and you don't want to have that fate befall OpenAI as becoming the Netscape of AI. So talk about what you were hoping, why did you get to them before others did?
Yeah, so, I mean, I can talk about the product integration specifically. I can give you specifics on that, but what we're hoping to bring is really the capabilities of the models that we are developing, and the multimodalities and the interaction to bring this thoughtfully into the Apple devices. And I'm sure you saw recently the release of GPT-4o. And that's the first time that we're seeing these models make a leap on the interaction vector versus the capabilities and just sheer intelligence. And that's really meaningful because, you know, so far the interaction with our devices has been very much focused and limited by texting. And this is a great opportunity to have a richer and more natural interaction with information, with each other, and really just make this interaction far less limited, and it opens up a lot of opportunities. So that's what we're looking for, and I guess we had great technology, and
they wanted to use yours. Users' requests that are sent to OpenAI reportedly won't be stored by you, and user IP addresses will be obscured. This is a big deal for Apple. I know that. Talk about how that will work. Can you still use data from those requests to train your models?
No, even now for our own users and customers, we don't use their data to train our models unless they specifically allow us to. So that would definitely still apply.
So when you're dealing with a company like Apple, whose reputation matters a great deal to them, especially around privacy, what were some of the things that they thought was important? Because, you know, one of the issues is the worries about where this information goes and what it's used for.
I think this is a very aligned partnership when it comes to privacy, when it comes to trust. For the mission of OpenAI, it is so critical that we build technologies and we deploy them in a way that people feel confident around them and they feel like they have agency and input into what we're building. So in that sense, this partnership is quite natural, and we feel very aligned, and it's only going to take us in deeper in the direction where we want to go. Specifically to your question, on misinformation. This is obviously very complex because we're building on top of decades of misinformation, and it's becoming even more and more intense with AI. But of course, we've got the internet, we have social media, and these are compounding effects. In a way, it's actually good that AI is bringing all of this to a head, and there is such scrutiny and intensity on this issue, because it feels like there is more of a collective effort and responsibility to do something about it that is meaningful. I think it's going to have to be iterative. So we'll have to try out things as we go. And I mean, if you look at the governance of news and media in the past 100 years, you know this better than me, it's been sort of iterative. Every time there is a new technology, things adapt.
Yes, we lose business model every time, but go ahead.
Perhaps not the best example.
Okay.
But the point is that it is iterative. Whenever there is a new technology,
Yes.
we adapt to it. And I think there is a technical innovations aspect that are going to help us deal with misinformation. And then there is the people issues and societal preparedness that is perhaps even more complex.
Well, I do know with Apple, you just can't fuck up, because they'll make trouble for you if that's the case. So I'm just curious, how did it start? Where did it begin, these discussions between Sam and Tim, or how were you involved?
I actually don't remember where it started, but it's been in the works for a while.
For a while. Are you talking to other companies to do things like that? Obviously, you have a relationship with Microsoft. Podcast listener, she smirked at me in a I'm not going to tell you anything way. All right, I'll move on from that. OpenAI has made deals with News Corp, Atlantic Media, and Vox Media, by the way, to license their content. So that's 3 potential lawsuits you don't have to worry about. I do own my podcast, and it's not included in your deal with Vox. Sorry. I would consider licensing it, but I probably not. How could you convince me to license my information? Rupert Murdoch already stole my other information, and the New York Times has my other information. I don't want anyone else to have it, including you.
Well,
Give me your
I know
pitch.
you'll ask about this at some point,
Yeah.
so I might as well tell you now. So when we look at the data to train our models, right, we're looking at sort of 3 different categories. The publicly available data, we look at partnerships that we've made with publishers, and we also pay human labelers to label specific data, and also users that opt in to allow us to use their data. So these are kind of the main categories where the data comes from. And the way that we think about publisher deals specifically is we care about accuracy of information, we care about news, and our users care about that. They want to have accurate information, and they want to see news on ChatGPT. And so it is a product-based relationship where there is value provided to the users through the product, and we're experimenting with different ways to monetize and give content creators basically some form of compensation for having their data show up in the products or being used in training, or whatever we are doing with the data. But it is very specific partnerships that we're doing one-on-one with specific publishers.
So some people do deals with you. You've done quite a few with AP and many others, but some sue, like the New York Times. How does it get to that point? Because I think a lawsuit is a negotiation in a way.
I mean, I can't comment on the lawsuit specifically, but it's actually it's quite unfortunate because of course we think that it is valuable to have news data and this type of information on the product. And so, we try to figure out a partnership, a deal around that. But yeah, in that case, it didn't go well.
Yeah. Well, it might go well someday. But I think it's because media has dealt with internet companies for years and usually has ended up on the very short end of a very long stick of theirs. But let me every episode we get an expert to send us a question. Let's hear yours. We're going to play it over the speaker.
Hi, Mira. I'm Fei Li, professor of computer science at Stanford University, also founding co-director of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. So since big data is widely considered to be one of the 3 elements of modern AI, I want to ask you a question about data. Much of OpenAI's success in your models is said to be related to data. We have learned that your company has acquired an enormous amount of data from the internet and other sources. So what do you think the relationship between data and models are? Is it as simple as the more data to feed into the model, the more powerful the model? Or is it that we need to spend lots of time curating different types of data in order to make the model work? Mm-hmm. And finally, how do you reconcile this appetite for so much human-generated data with the ownership and rights issues of these data? Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Great. That's a great question. For those who don't know, Fei Li is one of the very earliest pioneers in AI through ImageNet, Google, everything else. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question from Fei. So in terms of the relationship of data and models, this is actually something that a lot of people misunderstand about AI models and in particular large language models. The developers of these models, they're not pre-programming these models to do something specific. In fact, they are putting in a bunch of data. So these models are ingesting a huge quantity of data, and they are these incredible pattern matching systems. And through this process, intelligence emerges. So they learn to write and they learn to code. They learn to do basic math. They learn to summarize information and all sorts of things. We don't know exactly how this works, but we know that it works. Deep learning is very powerful. Well, but this is important because then people keep asking, how it works, and it goes into the transparency questions, and this is where we can describe the tools that we are using to provide transparency to the public about what we're doing. So understanding this first part is very, very important, how the large language models work, and you're combining, this architecture, neural nets, and a lot of data and a lot of compute, and you get this incredible intelligence. And this continues to increase, this capability, this performance improves as you put in more data and you put in more compute. Now, of course, you need to do quite a bit of work to make this data ingestible and actually useful and helpful for the models. But that is sort of kind of the basic structure of it. And as we're thinking about providing transparency into the model behavior and how things work, we have a few tools at our disposal because we want people to feel confident around using these models and also have a sense of agency and participation in them. And so one of the things that we've done is actually share with the public this document that we call the spec, the model spec, and it showcases how model behavior works and the types of decisions that we make internally at OpenAI and that we make with human labelers. And it's sort of the spec that decides what the model behavior looks like right now, as well as the desired model behavior in the future. And this is across the platform. And you see, by looking through the spec, you see the complexity of what's going on, that sometimes direction is is in conflict. Like, for example, you might say to the model, I want you to be very helpful. And also, I don't want you to, disobey the law.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say someone puts in a prompt that says, give me some tips to steal something to shoplift. Then the model is meant to be very helpful, but also it's not supposed to help you with something illegal. And so what should it do?
Helpful.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So how does it decide? A person certainly knows how to, or some people, not all.
Right. Right, but the model could interpret the guidance as, here are some tips to avoid shoplifting, and then accidentally kind of gives you things that you could do. But that depends. That's not so much model behavior. That's more on the person. And that goes into the area of misuse. But this just goes to show that model behavior is actually quite complicated. And it's not as simple as picking liberal values or other values.
Or putting anything into it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I think that gets people is the confusion about what's in it and what's not in it.
Yeah.
I think provenance is a big idea.
Right.
In March, you had an interview with Joanna Stern of The Journal, who asked you if OpenAI had used videos from YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook to train Sora, which is your text-to-video model, which is getting better and better. You said you didn't know. Is that you didn't know if you're using it or not? Shouldn't you know?
Right. So, I didn't handle that question.
Okay, why don't you handle it well now? Redo.
So I cannot tell you specifically where the data comes from, but the data comes from these three categories. So I can't give you the specific source because, this is trade secret and it helps us stay competitive. But I can tell you that the categories of data, and it's the ones that I mentioned earlier, publicly available data that we pay for through licensing and deals that we make with content providers, as well as data from users or where we have rights to use this data.
The only reason I'm asking, Perplexity just got into trouble because they were basically scraping in a quicker way a story and then not giving the citing of it. You could see how any media company could be worried about that idea.
Right. Yeah. So, we want to make sure that we are respectful to content creators, and we are doing a set of things to experiment with ways to compensate people for data creation. So we're building this tool that we're calling Content Media Manager, and this will allow us more specifically to identify the types of data that
record companies do it. Everyone,
Right.
It's been done in the past, so it's not an impossible thing to be able to do that.
Right.
Speaking of Sora, this week, Ashton Kutcher told Eric Schmidt, what an interesting pair. I have a beta version of it, and it's pretty amazing. He also said the bar is going to go way up because why are you going to watch my movie when you could just watch your own movie? He's basically saying people will be able to type out their movie in their head, and AI will turn in a movie they can watch. Right now, it's quite crude, but does it sound plausible to you? And when will Sora be ready for public release?
We don't have a timeline for public release for Sora yet. What we're doing right now with Sora is we've given access to red teamers and we've given access to some content creators to help us identify ways to make this robust. We're doing a lot of work on safety front, but also to figure out how do we actually bring this to the public in a way that's useful. That's not very straightforward. Right now, it's really a technology. And this has been a pretty consistent process that we have followed with every new technology that we have developed. We'll usually work with those that have, like for example with DALL-E, we worked with creators initially and they helped us identify ways to create an interface where they felt more empowered, and they could create more projects and make
right.
it. Basically, you just want to extend the creativity of
So
people.
Sora presumably is a little more dangerous because of the
video
than a chatbot, correct? Is that the worry? I mean, you could easily see porn movies with Scarlett Johansson, for example. I'm going to ask about her in a second, but that she wasn't appearing in, like things like that. How do are you more worried about video? Is that?
Video has a bunch of other issues, right? Because especially when done very well, which I think Sora is quite remarkable. And video is very visceral, and of course it can be very emotional, evocative. So we have to address all the safety issues and figure out the guardrails and figure out how do we actually deploy a useful and helpful product. But also, from commercial perspective, nobody wants a product that is going to create a bunch of, safety or reputational scandals out there.
Yeah, that's just Facebook, but go ahead. Facebook Live. Nice to meet you, but go ahead.
So, it's so we're really
go ahead, you can laugh, it's funny.
So I think this is really incredible and magical technology, but the breadth, the reach, the consequence is also great, and so it's important that we get this right. Now, of course, at OpenAI, at least, we use iterative deployment strategy. So we usually release to a small group of people. We try to identify edge cases, and once we feel confident about how we handle them, we expand access. But you need to figure out what is the product's surface and what's the business model around it. And we have
about that idea of consequence. One of my big themes is lack of interest in consequences of not you. Earlier tech companies, we became the beta tester for all their stuff. No, if they released a car like this, and they'd never allow it to happen, they'd be sued out of existence. But a lot of tech is released in a beta version that gets foisted upon the human public. The idea of consequences, do you feel as if you yourself, as Chief Technology Officer, even if you can't figure out all the consequences, there's enough respect for the idea that there are consequences for every single invention you make?
It's consequences that we will feel on our skin and on our society. So by that, I don't necessarily actually mean regulation or legal ways. I mean, a moral imperative to get this right. I'm optimistic, and I think this technology is incredible, and it will allow us to do just amazing things. I'm very excited for its potential in science, in discovery, in education, in particular in healthcare. But whenever you have something so powerful, there is also the potential for some catastrophic risk. I mean, this has always been the case. Humans have tried to amplify it.
True, but I mean, the quote that I used in my book was was from Paul Virilio. When you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. Mm-hmm. This is more than a shipwreck, a possibility. But correct?
Well, I disagree with that, because my background is in engineering. Our entire world is engineered. Engineering is risk, right? Like, the entire human civilization is built on engineering practice, like our cities, our bridges, everything. And there is always risk that comes with that. And you manage that risk with responsibility. But it's not just the developers, it's a shared responsibility. And in order to make it shared, you actually need to give people access and tools and bring them along, instead of, building it in a vacuum and technologies that are not accessible.
Right. So let's talk about that. I want to get to that. I want to put a pin in that. But you said last month you announced the iteration of ChatGPT 4. I love your names. ChatGPT 4 Oh.
Yes, it's a great name.
Can't you call it like Claude, or they all have those? That's okay. ChatGPT is fine. You're making it free, correct? That one's
Yes.
free. But then you also announced you're training a new model, ChatGPT 5, and then there'll be 5AB. But will that be an incremental step forward? Is it exponentially better? And what's the expected release date? Kara.
So, on GPT-4o, O stands for omni-model.
Okay.
Because it ties together all the modalities, vision, text, audio. And what's so special about this model is that for the first time, you can interact very seamlessly and naturally with the model. The latency is almost imperceptible. And that's a huge jump in the interaction with AI. It's quite different from the previous releases that we have made. And we wanted to make the latest capability free for all users. We wanted everyone to get a sense for what the technology can do, what these new modalities look like, and also understand the limits of it. And it goes to what I was saying earlier, that you actually want to give people access to bring them along, because it's so much easier to understand the potential and the limitations of the technology if you're experiencing it and if you have an intuitive sense
so
for what
is
it
in
can
5? It all could be like this little appetizer. So now buy 5. But what is in 5 that's different? Is it a incremental or a very big leap?
We don't know, but I mean that's going to.
A little
I don't know
bit.
what we will call it.
Right.
But the next large model is going to be quite capable, and we can expect, sort of big leaps like we've seen from GPT-3 to GPT-4. But we don't know yet.
What do you think will be in it? You do know.
We'll see.
We'll see. I'll see, but what about you?
No, even I don't know.
What?
Even I don't know.
Really? Okay, all right. So one of the things that you've obviously been involved in, and you and I have talked about this, said that an internal OpenAI roadmap predicted that it would achieve AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, for people who don't realize it has not been achieved, by 2027, which would be a huge deal. Explain the significance, and also tell us if he's saying about the roadmap true, and when do you estimate we'll achieve AGI?
So people will define AGI differently. We have a definition of AGI by the charter, which is the systems that can do, economically valuable work across different domains. From what we're seeing now, the definition of intelligence just keeps changing. So a while back, we would look at academic benchmarks to test how intelligent the systems were. And then once we saturated these benchmarks, we looked at exams, school exams. And eventually, when we saturate those, we'll have to come up with new evals. And it makes you think, how do we evaluate fit and intelligence in a work environment? We have interviews, we have internships, we have different ways. So I do expect that this definition will continuously evolve. I think perhaps what's going to become more important is assessing, evaluating, and forecasting impact in the real world, whether it's societal impact as well as economic impact in the real world.
So not this moment where it just suddenly goes, oh, look at me, and decides what to do for itself, right? I think that's the worry, correct?
Because there are for the AGI definition specifically, yes, and that's important, and I think the definition of intelligence will continue to evolve. But I think what's equally important is how it affects society and at what rate it actually penetrates.
Using
society.
that definition, when does OpenAI think that? Is that 2027 number correct?
Well, I'll say, within the next decade, we will have extremely advanced systems.
Intelligent, which you would characterize as traditionally intelligent.
Traditionally intelligent
Yeah.
systems? I mean, we already have
Yes, we do.
traditionally
Yeah,
intelligent
yeah.
systems, yeah.
But what people are worried about, because obviously we have to talk about the safety versus product discussion. Now, OpenAI was started this way. I think the reason you're having these discussions is because the way it was started, you had I would say a mixed marriage. The people who were there for helping humanity, the people there who really like $1 trillion. So, or in between. I think you're probably in between. Last week, 13 current and former OpenAI and Google DeepMind employees, it crosses lots of companies. It's not just, OpenAI just gets all the attention because it's gotten a lot of attention, obviously. They published an open letter calling for companies to grant them a right to warn about advanced artificial intelligence. This isn't new. Facebook, Google, and Microsoft employees have been known to sign open letters, whether it's working with the Defense Department, et cetera. But in this case, the employees say that, quote, broad confidentiality agreements block us from voicing our concerns, except that the very companies may be failing to address these issues, which is essentially saying, oh no, we can't tell you what oh no is, but you'll all die, essentially. That's what it sounded like from the letter. What's your response? And the people saying they're worried about retaliation. And I'm not going to go into the vested equity because I think you've apologized and corrected that. But shouldn't they be able to voice their concerns if they have them? And I know there's differing opinions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we think debate is super important, and being able to publicly voice these concerns and talk about issues on safety. And we've done this ourselves, since the beginnings of OpenAI. We've been very open about concerns on misinformation, even since the GPT-2 days. Is something that we've studied since early on. I think that, in the past few years, there has been such incredible progress, such incredible technological progress that nobody anticipated and forecasted. And this has also increased the general anxiety around societal preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
As we continue this progress, we see sort of where the science leads us. And so it's understandable that people have fears and anxieties about what's to come. Now, I would say specifically the work that we've done at OpenAI, the way that we've deployed these models, I think we have an incredible team, and we've deployed the most capable models very safely, and I feel very proud of that. I also think that given the rate of progress in technology and the rate of our own progress, it's super important to double down on all of these things: security, safety, our preparedness framework, which talks about how do we think about the risk of training and deploying frontier models.
Right, but you talked about that. I mean, one was why the need for secrecy and non-disclosure and stricter than other companies, one. And two, the open letter comes after a string of high-profile departures, including Jan Leike and Ilya Sutskever. Both have now, they led the now disbanded Super Alignment Team, which was in charge of safety. Ilya was a co-founder. He joined with 3 other board members to oust Sam, the CEO. I don't think it's a surprise that he's gone, but like he posted this on X, over the past years, safety culture and processes have taken a backseat to shiny products. That's probably the most persistent criticism leveled at OpenAI, and I think it's the split in this company that from the beginning that this was one of the issues. Do you think that's fair, and why or why not? If you say you're very interested in safety, they say you're not. How do you meet that criticism?
Well, a few things. So the alignment team is not in charge of safety. At OpenAI, that is one of our safety teams. Very important safety team, but it is one of them. We have many, many people working on safety at OpenAI, and I can explain that in a second. And Jan is an incredible researcher, colleague. I worked with him for 3 years. I have a lot of respect for Jan. and he left OpenAI to join Anthropic.
Which is a competitor, but go ahead.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I think that we do absolutely, I mean, everyone in the industry and OpenAI, we need to double down on the things that we've been doing on safety and security and preparedness and regulatory engagement, given the progress that we're anticipating in the field. But I disagree on the fact that, or maybe on speculation that maybe we put product in front of safety or ahead of safety. In fact,
Why do you think they say that? Because these are people you worked with.
Well, I think you have to ask them, but I think that many people think of safety as something separate from capability, that there is this separation between safety and capability, and that you need to sort of advance one ahead of the other. From the beginning of OpenAI, I joined from aerospace and automotive, and these are industries with very established safety thinking and systems, and you know, places where people are not necessarily constantly debating around the table what safety is, but they're doing it because obviously it's really quite established. And so I think the whole industry needs to move more and more towards a discipline of safety that is very empirical. We have safety systems, we have rigorous discipline on operational safety. And what I mean by that is in a few areas, not just the operational discipline, but also safety of our products and deployments today, which covers things like, you know, harmful biases and thinking about misinformation, disinformation, classifiers, all these types of work. And then we're also thinking about the alignment of the models long term. So not just the alignment today.
Oops, sorry, I'm turning off my phone and I turned on the beep. Go ahead. Sorry.
Not just the alignment of the models today, which, you know, we use reinforcement learning with human feedback to do that, but also the alignment of the models as they get more and more powerful. And this is a niche area of research where, you know, a lot of the concerns.
Sure, but it persists with OpenAI. I do think it's because you're the leading company at this moment in time. But it's this idea of people leaving and saying, you know, even Sam went before Congress and said that AI could, quote, cause significant harm to the world. He signed a letter warning about extinction risk posed by AGI, which is pretty bad, I think. There's an overlap, what he said, and what AI doomers say. There's doomsday rhetoric, and you're putting out products. So a lot of people are like, they just want the money, and they're not worried about the damage. Well, that's what they're saying, that shiny new products is over worrying about the impact of those products.
Yeah, in my opinion, that's overly cynical. I mean, there is this incredible team at OpenAI that joined because of the mission of the company, and I don't think, you know, all 1,000 people at OpenAI are trying to do that. I mean, we have this incredible talent, people that care deeply about the mission of the company, and we're all working extremely hard to develop and deploy the systems in a way that is safe. And all you need to see is the track record. I mean, we were the first to deploy these systems in the world. And we deployed GPT-3 in the API, 3.5 in ChatGPT, DALL-E 3, GPT-4 across the platforms. We have partnerships, and we have taken great care not to have safety incidents.
We're not, you worked with cars and other things. We're not at the safety belt level. I mean, car manufacturers resisted those things, putting safety belts in cars or different things that make cars safer. Are we at that point, or are regulators going to make you do it? The Federal Trade Commission opened an investigation into OpenAI in July over potential harm to consumers, unspecified. Last week, they announced an antitrust investigation into OpenAI's deal with Microsoft. I have said that I thought Microsoft bought OpenAI, but pretended it didn't. Technically, they own 49%. Well done, Satya Nadella. If If you were forced to cut ties with Microsoft, how would it affect your ability to compete? So if people are scrutinizing you over these issues, or whether there's safety or whatever, what can you do if the government starts to?
I think it's great that people are scrutinizing us, and they should scrutinize the entire industry. We're building something incredibly powerful, and we're working extremely hard to make it great. But there are risks to it, and I think people should be deeply engaged and understand what the technology is, and also figure out what it means for the different domains. And technology in itself is just not enough in order to figure out how to deploy it usefully and safely. And we do need all of this, societal halo and engineering infrastructure around it to make that happen. So I think it's great to have scrutiny and have people involved and have, independent verifiers and so on. And we've been talking about this earlier than anyone. As for the partnership with Microsoft specifically, Microsoft has been very aligned and a great partner to us. And we work very closely together on building the most advanced supercomputers. And you know that the supercomputers are the heart of building this AI model. So that's an incredibly important partnership for us.
So I want to talk a little bit, and then finish up talking about, and then get some questions from the audience, but about election and disinformation. But I want to talk about you and your role at the company. I think I've met you during the blip, which was when, I think that's what you call it internally, which is when Sam was fired and then unfired. Talk to me about your relationship with Sam. I like Sam, but I also think he's feral and aggressive, like most of technology people. And he certainly is aggressive, and that's fine. It's not an issue for me because some people are more feral and more aggressive. But talk a little bit about what happened then, because you became CEO of that company.
For a few days.
Yeah. Okay. How was it?
It was kind of stressful.
Yeah. So there were some of the board members said you complained about him, and your lawyer pushed back and said you had feedback about him. Can you tell us what you said about him?
Look, there is so much interest around the people running these companies.
Yeah.
Obviously, it makes sense, and OpenAI and all the drama that happened then. And it's understandable. At the end of the day, we're just people running these companies. We have disagreements. We work through them. And at the end of the day, we all care deeply about the mission, and that's why we're there. And we put the mission and the team first. Sam is a visionary. He has great ambition, and he's built an amazing company. We have a strong partnership, and all the things that I've shared with the board when they asked, he already knew. So it's nothing.
So how do you look at your relationship? Because you're one of the key employees there now. They've just hired Kevin Will and others to keep bringing on more experienced management. How do you look at your relationship with him?
It's incredibly important, right? We have a very strong partnership, and we can talk directly about whatever issues we're going through. And from both sides, we've gone through. It's been a tough couple of years. We've gone through growing pains, and we need to put the mission first and get better, and just have the humility to get better.
How do you push back at him? I understand this dynamic. It happened to Google. It happened at early Microsoft. It happened at Amazon. Things change within these companies, especially as they grow. And they make, Google was chaotic in the early days. And Facebook went through so many COOs, I can't even tell you. It was like a parade of guys that went through there that Mark didn't like. I'm aware of this. But how do you push back on someone, on Sam? Like for example, he has invested in 400 companies. Some companies do business with OpenAI. He's invested $375 million in an energy company named Helion, which is a pretty cool company, actually. They're currently in talks to provide massive amounts of electricity to OpenAI. Compute takes a lot of electricity, as people know. How do you deal with him on a day-to-day basis? How do you look at that relationship, and where do you push back?
I mean, all the time. That is, I think it's normal when you're doing what we're doing, and Sam will push the team very hard, and I think that's good. It's great to have big ambition and to test the limits of what we can do. And when I feel like it's beyond, I feel like basically I can push back, and that's sort of the relationship we've had for over 6 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is productive. That you need to be able to push back. Could
you give me an example of doing that? Perhaps Scarlett Johansson, for example. I mean, you were working on that, correct? You were working on that particular voice element.
Yeah, look, we have a strong partnership, but the selection of the voice was not a high priority, not something that we were working on together. I was making the decisions on that. Mm-hmm. And Sam has his own relationships, and after I'd selected the voice behind Sky, he had reached out to Scarlett Johansson. So, we didn't talk to each other about that specific decision, and that was unfortunate. And
yeah, so he was freelancing it.
Well, he's got his own connections, and so, we weren't entirely coordinated on this one.
Do you think it's very funny in a lot of ways, especially because of the movie and the tweet he did? But do you think one of the things I thought was, here's the first time this is not good. This is a real error on OpenAI's part, because finally everyone's like, oh, even if you didn't steal her voice, Sam looked like Ursula in The Little Mermaid. He did. You don't have to agree with me, but it's true. Even if it's not so, and as it's turned out, you had been doing it for months, and it was a different person and everything else, it's a little less exciting than we stole Scarlett Johansson's voice. But it encapsulates for people this idea of taking from people the fear, and I think that is a moment. Do you worry that that's the image of tech companies coming in and grabbing everything they can? I do think that's absolutely true.
I do worry about that perception, but all you can do is just do the work, get it right, and then people will see what happens, and you will build trust that way. I don't think there is some magical way to build trust other than actually do the work and do it right.
Have you talked to Scarlett Johansson at all?
No.
She was funny backstage. I know, she was backstage, and I was mentioning different things like baby reindeer, and she didn't know what I was talking about, because you are deep into your job. You're under a rock, did you say?
Well, yeah, things are very intense, so I'm extremely focused on my work right now. But also, I grew up in Albania, in Balkan countries, so I didn't grow up with American pop culture. Mm-hmm.
But you're not paying attention right now. So let me finish up talking about election disinformation, and then we'll get questions from the audience. 3 new studies that look at online disinformation collectively suggest the problem is smaller than we think, and disinformation itself is not that effective. One study finds that we're dealing with a demand-side issue. Some people want to hear conspiracy theories, and they'll seek it out, whether it's on AM radio or social media. Others think differently, that this is a really massive problem, and obviously you heard the previous thing. People have a lot of conspiracy theories out there, and it's fueled by social media in many ways. So when you think about AI-powered disinformation in the upcoming presidential election, what keeps you up at night? What's the worst-case scenarios you have, and the most likely negative outcomes from your perspective?
With the current systems, they're very capable of persuasion and influencing your way of thinking and your beliefs. So this is something that we've been studying for a while, and I do believe it's a real issue with AI. It gets majorly exacerbated. So especially in the past year, we've been very focused on how to help election integrity. And there are a few things that we are doing. So number one, we're trying to prevent abuse as much as possible. And so that includes improving the accuracy of detection, political information detection, and understanding what's going on in the platform and taking quick action when that happens. So that's one. The second thing is reducing political bias. So you might have seen that ChatGPT was, criticized for being overly liberal.
That was Elon. You're too woke, right?
Well, there were a few other voices, but the point is that it wasn't intentional, and we work really hard to reduce the political bias in the model behavior, and we'll continue to do this, and also the hallucinations. And then the third thing is we want to point people to the correct information when they're looking for where they should be voting or voting information. So we're focusing on these three things when it comes to elections, but broadly for misinformation, I would say, deepfakes are unacceptable. So we need to have very robust ways for people to understand when they're looking at a deepfake. We've already done a couple of things. We've implemented C2PA for images. And so it's sort of like, metadata that follows the content in other platforms on the internet, like a passport. And we've also opened up to red teaming classifiers for DALL-E, where you can detect that an image has been generated by DALL-E or not. So metadata and classifiers are two technical ways to deal.
This is provenance, where
for
it comes
provenance
from.
of information, and this is for text specifically. And we're also looking at watermarking. Sorry, that's for images specifically, and we're also looking for watermarking. We're looking at watermarking techniques to implement in text and how to do that robustly. But the point is that people should know when they're dealing with deepfakes, and we want people to trust the information that they're seeing.
Well,
and
although the whole point of these fakes is they're trying to fake you, correct? I mean, a political consultant, FCC just fined him $6 million for creating deepfake audio robocalls, sounded like Biden during the New Hampshire primary. There could be more sophisticated versions. OpenAI is working on a tool called Voice Engine that can recreate someone's voice using only a 15-second recording. It'll be able to create a recording of someone speaking another language. It's not out yet because, as your product manager told the New York Times, this is a sensitive thing. It's important to get it right. Why even make this? I mean, one of the things I always used to say to tech people, and I'll say it to you, if you're a Black Mirror episode, maybe you shouldn't make it.
I think that's kind of hopeless approach. It's like these technologies are amazing. They carry incredible promise, and we can get this right.
I like that you called me hopeless. I am, but go ahead. Then again, I have 4 children, so I must be hopeful. Who knows? Anyway, go ahead. I'm hopeless.
We did build Voice Engine in 2022. And we had not released it, and even now it's in a very limited approach because we are trying to figure out how to deal with these issues. But you can't make it robust on your own. You actually need to partner with experts from different areas, with civil society, with governments, with creators to figure out how to actually make it robust. It's not the one-stop safety problem. It's quite complex, and so we need to do the work.
So I'm going to ask you one final question, then we'll get to questions from the audience. You hear versions of this, today's AI is the worst you'll ever use, and you are very positive about it, but I'd love you to put together one, if you were a doomer, then there seems to be, I literally had someone come up to me saying, if I don't stop Sam Altman, he's going to kill humanity, which I felt was a little dramatic. And then there's others that say, no matter what, it's going to be the best thing ever. We're all going to live on Mars and enjoy the delicious Snickers bars there. They have very different things. It sort of feels like being around Republicans and Democrats right now. Very different versions. So I'd love you to give me the thing that you worry most about and the thing that you are most hopeful about. And then we'll get questions from the audience.
Okay, so first of all, I don't think it's a preordained outcome. I think that we have a lot of agency for how we build this technology and how we deploy it in the world. And in order to get it right, we need to figure out how to create a shared responsibility. And I think a lot of that depends on understanding the technology, making it very accessible. The way it goes wrong is by misunderstanding it. And
Meaning?
not understanding the capabilities and not understanding the risks. That is, I think, the biggest risk. Now, in terms of some specific scenarios, I mean, how our democracies interact with this information or with these technologies is incredibly powerful, and it's a lot about what we've been talking today. And I do think there are major risks around persuasion,
Propaganda.
where you could persuade people very strongly to do specific things. You could control people to do specific things, and I think that's incredibly scary. To control society to go in a specific direction. And in terms of the promise, one of the things I'm very excited about is having high quality and free education available everywhere in some remote village, really in middle of nowhere. For me, education was very important. Personally, it was everything. It really changed my life. And I can only imagine, today we have so many tools available. So if you have electricity and the internet, a lot of these tools are available. But still, most people are in classrooms with one teacher, 50 students, and so on. And everyone gets taught the same thing. Like, imagine if education is catered to the way that you think, to your cultural norms, and to your specific interests. That could be extremely powerful in extending the level of knowledge and creativity. And it can, even if you consider like learning how to learn, that kind of happens very late in life, maybe college, maybe even later. And that is such a fundamental thing. What if we were able to really grasp this and get this, really learn how we learn at much younger age? I think that is very powerful, and it can push human knowledge, and pushing human knowledge can push the entire civilization forward.
Okay, we'll end on that. Questions from the audience?
I'm Charles Yarber. I'm an alumni of the school.
Okay.
Regarding opting in with data, obviously there's a thing with Google where it was picking up old Reddit posts and telling people to put glue on pizza so it stuck together. So obviously that's a fluke that we worked out. But if you're not a New York Times that can hire a lot of lawyers to sue, is there a way to opt out from having what you put online be scraped by a company and then used to train AI? Thank you.
Yeah, the glue pizza was, Google had to pull back on some of its thing because it was saying things like John Kennedy was still alive and going to college at Wisconsin and stuff like that. Wasn't a good showing by Google. So he's saying, is there any way to opt out of the data so that you're not being used by these systems? Because if you're in the public internet, you're being used by it. So is there any way? And the CEO of Perplexity just said, everything's free on the internet. He just said it again, like I can take anything I want. I think that's shoplifting. You may disagree. How do you think about that, of opting out, of citizens being able to do that?
So I mean, that's why we're building this content media manager, and so this is for publishers, but we're trying to figure out ways for anyone out there to identify data that they don't want to be used for training, or they have specific requests for how that is used. And we'll be prototyping with a lot of different ways to do this. I think that's very important, to give people control over their data. But there is also, there is the question of, can you operate according to what you want within the digital world today, what should the problem statement be? Should it be that you don't want your data to be anywhere? That could be one problem statement to consider. Another one could be that you don't want undue influence from these AI systems on the way that you think, you operate, the way that you interact with information. I think that's also something to consider as we think about privacy and we think about how data is used and what it actually means when this data is put into these models.
Okay, next question. No, we don't have time, sorry. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, next. Good.
Dmitry Alperovich, given that these models that you guys are building and your competitors are building are no longer just valuable intellectual property for your companies, but are becoming increasingly national assets that are important for national security, economic security, and given that they're just large files with numbers in them, weights, how confident are you that our adversaries, China and Russia, are not able to steal them, haven't already stolen them?
Securing the technology and protecting the IP is the number one priority of the company, as you can imagine. And, for what we do, we're constantly under attack, and we need to be extremely robust against these adversarial attacks. We also try to help others in the ecosystem to become more robust against these attacks. So we will publish on security, and we will, to the extent that we can, obviously, because they can also release vulnerabilities, and we'll cooperate with others in the industry to share lessons. Also on questions of platform abuse, actually just last week, we shared some information on having caught some influence operations that were
China, Iran, and Russia, correct?
It was backed by China, Russia, Iran, and we took them down. And it was mostly a sort of misinformation, disinformation type of impact, and we caught it early. We got rid of these actors from the platform, and we wanted to share the information for sort of the benefit of the broader ecosystem. So we'll do more stuff like that.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Kara. Chris Roberts. Thanks for coming to DC. Appreciate that. Besides you and Scott getting us through the pandemic, truly appreciate that too. So as a local swamp guy, we say thanks. My question really has to do with the fact that ChatGPT is a large language model, and our communication between each other often relies on context and sentiment, that is, getting along in that conversation to understand where we're coming from both. Mira, you made the comment that you grew up in a different country. You didn't understand pop culture currently. ChatGPT's model cuts off, I believe, in September 2021, and then you rely on web searches to augment that data. So when we're talking about misinformation and getting it right, when I give it a search or it's misunderstanding current political context, for instance, how do we ensure that you're pulling from the right references to get the right answer to the right people at the right time? And then since those trusted sources that you license are proprietary, trade secrets, as you said, how do we know that we're getting it and getting it right from you? Thanks.
Yeah, so actually, fun fact, the way that ChatGPT started as a project was a research project on truthfulness. We wanted to be able to express uncertainty, and we wanted to be able to cite information in large language models. And then it transformed into, different research projects. But so the things that we're doing today on the platform, we have we have tools, we've introduced tools, and we have browsing where you can look for content, and we also work on publisher deals, so we can bring news and we can bring additional content into the platform and increase the accuracy. And we're also working on hallucinations, and hallucinations keep getting better or reduced. And obviously, that's a major problem with large language models in general. I don't think it's going to be, it's not going to be zero. But as the models get smarter, they get better. We should expect increased reliability, and for them not to, make up stuff. So the issue of misinformation is quite complex because you've got the hallucination issue, you've got citing information, you want to know where it comes from, and we're working on that as well. And then you want the sources as broad and rich as possible. And then you also have to think about the product surface. The product surface being, different if you are engaging in learning versus when you need perhaps a recommendation for buying something.
Yeah. Okay. Let's have two more, I think. Go ahead.
You mentioned earlier that you weren't able to disclose where you get certain data to the public to remain competitive. It made me think of Neil deGrasse Tyson discussing how a lot of information we have about space and what we utilize that information from automatically gets translated to war. So thinking of if you were CEO for a day again, would you choose to release that information to the government to ensure that we are creating a space where we can get to regulation in a way that protects the public, in a way that is aligned with not only Americans but the world?
So blip two. So go ahead.
I didn't catch the whole question. What was the second part?
The second part. Say the second part again.
If you were CEO for a day, again, would you choose to release that information to the government so that the government could support regulation and create a space where we could have...
For where things are coming from. You say you want to keep things proprietary. Yeah.
Oh, the data. You have to think about what's actually the most important information to make... basically, what's the theory of change? If you're going to make the government aware of something, you're going to release competitive information. What are you trying to do with it? What is the government going to do with all of this? And what is the most impactful piece of information that you would share with them? We have a very good relationship with the US government, and we work very closely with other governments. So we give them early access to, especially the US AI Safety Institute, and we give them early access to the technology so they can red team, they have an idea of what to expect. And I would focus more on sort of what is the roadmap, an early view into the technology versus, specifics, some key specifics on data.
Okay, next question, last one.
Hi, thank you for speaking with us today. My name is Josh Curtis. I'm a student here at SAIS, focusing among other things, on AI safety. I'm curious about the spoilerism problem in the context where we know that OpenAI is very concerned about safety, and so are some of OpenAI's competitors, especially in the United States and Europe. But we're still in somewhat of a wild west of technology regulation, where it's quite easy to see data scientists who have their own ideas leaving companies and going to set up shop, their own shop. Could be a less scrupulous shop. How does OpenAI see this problem of AI safety in a world where there may not be super strenuous regulation?
And tons of money.
So on regulation, I think, and I've been very vocal about this, I think it's important to find the right balance between flexibility, you don't want rigidity here given the very quick pace on technological progress, but you want enough flexibility so the regulation is actually impactful and useful, and it adapts to the changes in the technology. But at the same time, you also want the guardrails and steering in place early enough such that you can maximize the public benefits. And, it's great for private companies to, make profit and to have a commercially rich ecosystem and a marketplace. And I think marketplaces actually can having sort of rules and guidelines and regulation in marketplace, so they can it makes them very rich, and that's great. But you need to make sure that this happens early enough such that you're maximizing the public good and not just the profit of the companies. In terms of specifics of the regulation, I sort of hesitate to say what it should be specifically, but the way that we've engaged with regulators so far has been, we do a lot of things and we know what works, what has an impact, and we will share those commitments voluntarily, and sometimes they've become standards for the industry. That has been the case with the White House voluntary commitments. And it is nice to know that if you're making a commitment or putting regulation in place, it's something that you can operationalize, that works, that actually drives a safer impact versus something that just looks good. And so I think there needs to be very tight collaboration there between industry and regulators to get this right. And we need people in the government that actually understand AI. And there's been more of that in the recent months, especially with the creation of the US AI Safety Institute.
All right, I'm going to ask the last question. I'd be remiss if there's not very many women in these positions of leadership. You're probably right now one of the most prominent and powerful women in tech. Do you think that matters at all, that you do that? And who do you look up to?
It matters when I go to schools and I engage with students and they say that they find it inspiring. That actually gives me joy. Mm-hmm. It is the case that STEM is quite male dominated, but also I think diversity comes in different forms and not just gender, and that's. Yeah, it's a bit simplistic to think about just gender. It's like cultures and, the way that we think about problems. And it's obvious that we want very diverse teams to do great work, especially when we're working on issues of artificial intelligence that impact everything, the entire society.
So who or what inspires you?
A lot of people, my colleagues that I work very closely with day to day, people that I've worked with in the past. But day to day, I just have such incredible joy working with these remarkable people that are so dedicated and driven by curiosity and put the mission of the company first. I realize it's kind of it's a rare privilege to work with such high density of talent and people that are kind and nice.
Where are you in 10 years then? Where are you in 10 years then?
10 years. 10 years is a long time to forecast. Yeah. I hope we've made some amazing breakthroughs in science by then.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Mira Murati.
Thank you so much.